Welcome to the PA Books podcast. PA Books is a production of PCN, the Pennsylvania Cable Network. This program features interviews with authors of books on Pennsylvania people, history, sports, business, nature, and politics. We hope you enjoy this podcast.
This is PA Books, featuring authors of books about Pennsylvania's people, politics, history, and business. This week, Lawrence Little discusses his book, Disciples of Liberty, the African Methodist Episcopal Church in the Age of Imperialism.
Lawrence Little, author of Disciples of Liberty, the African Methodist Episcopal Church in the Age of Imperialism. Why'd you write your book?
Well, I wrote my book to, first off, I wrote as a dissertation to get a PhD, and then I wrote the book basically to tell the story of African Americans at the turn of the century and how they reacted to foreign policies and global issues at the turn of the century. One of the things that happened is I was, as an undergraduate, I was working on my senior thesis. I went to college late in life, right? And I was working on my senior thesis, and I ran into this war that I'd never heard of, the Philippine-American War. The teacher was talking about it, and so I got intrigued about it, and so I decided to write a paper about black soldiers who had served in the Philippine-American War. It happens, at the turn of the century, and the 5,000 black soldiers, participated. Part of the reason why, even though I went back to college late in life, I thought I knew most of the wars, and I missed this war completely, And the more I saw it, I began to realize, the Spanish-American War lasted about 3 months, and it killed maybe, just only a handful of Americans died, mostly from disease. But the Philippine-American War lasts 3 years, and it's a war of subjugation, and it's a war that's a lot like Vietnam. And so I got kind of intrigued at looking at it, and I saw that black soldiers served in it, so I got interested in looking at the black soldiers. And then when I was at Ohio State, I had to have something to write about, right? And so I remembered that when I wrote my senior thesis, I remembered that the A.M.E. people were pretty vocal on both sides of the war. Some were for it and some were against it. And so I thought maybe I could expand this. I could look at what the A.M.E. said about for international issues altogether. And so Wilberforce was 60 miles. I went to Ohio State, and Wilberforce is 60 miles away. And sure enough, I went to the archives there, and there was just this treasure of information there.
What archives were they?
The Wilberforce, the A.M.E. Church's archives are in Wilberforce, Ohio. That's where their university is. And so once I saw all of these, I was blowing dust off of these records, right?
No one had researched them.
No one had used them. And I saw that not only they were concerned with, the Philippine-American War, but they were concerned with international issues, everywhere. Issues that had to do with self-determination, issues that had to do with oppression. And then I began to really, search and look at that, and I became really interested in what they had to say about the various things going on in the world during that time.
Now, you refer to A.M.E. a couple times, and for people who don't know, what is the African Methodist Episcopal Church?
Well, the African Methodist Episcopal Church is the oldest black denomination of all of Christianity. It begins in 1816 as a denomination, but it can really trace its roots back to 1789 is a good year. Right then, Richard Allen, who founded the church, who was a founder of the church, he and several black leaders of the congregation. St. George's Episcopal down in Philadelphia had an integrated congregation, and they made renovations. And when they made the renovations, they placed all of the black congregation in what they called, at the time, Amen corners. So they segregated the black congregation. But the black congregation had helped to pay for these renovations, and so they were upset, and so eventually, they were treated rudely, and so the church members got up and they walked out of the church, and they went on a few years later to found the Mother Bethel Church in 1794, and then and then in 1816, Richard Allen called Methodists from up and down the eastern seaboard, Baltimore, New York, Boston, Philadelphia. He called them all together to a conference, and they formed the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And so it was a stalwart black institution that really begins right at the birth of the nation. So the nation and the church really begin at the same time, even during, 1789. That's the Constitutional Convention, and so all of that's happening right at the same time. So, as I say in the book, they're forged in the same embers, those same democratic embers that really helped to forge the nation.
You mentioned Mother Bethel Church. Where is that still standing?
Okay, yeah, Mother Bethel Church, founded in 1794. It's actually on the same site that it was on. It's on 6th and Lombard downtown, just a short walk away from Independence Hall. It's on the same site. As a matter of fact, there's an old lithograph that shows it used to be a blacksmith shop, and they had to actually take the blacksmith shop and carry it to the site that it's on now, right? And so there is this scene of, and we're not really sure, we can't say 100% sure that it's the blacksmith shop, but there's this scene of this old lithograph that shows this blacksmith shop being transported past the Independence Hall, right? And it's a great shot, showing the mule carrying the church, And so it's been there since, it's been in the exact same location since 1794. And
if you go there now, what do you see?
Well, you see, you'll see the A.M.E. Church. You'll see Mother Bethel Church. They also have a museum downstairs where they have such a rich church history that there's tons to see in the museum. They have some leftovers from the Richard Allen era. Some historical artifacts that are, it used to be a site for the Underground Railroad, so all of that's still there, so you can see the rooms where the former slaves used to sit. They have a really good website. They're part of the Philadelphia Virtual Tour, right? And so they have a good website there. And it's a tourist attraction, it's a landmark, a national landmark.
Are services still held there?
Oh, yeah, services are held. Oh, yeah, it's an active church. Oh, yeah, it's an active church. It's been an active church since 1794. So it's yeah.
Now, you mentioned this gentleman, Richard Allen, who is credited with being the founder of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. What can you tell us about him?
Well, he's a former slave. He once again brought up in the Revolutionary War era. He becomes a black preacher during the Great Awakening. During the Great Awakening, the First Great Awakening, that's when many slaves first began to really embrace Christianity because of the evangelical message that the Great Awakening brought forth. Kinds of messages that all people are equal under God, that you can deserve salvation. Those kinds of that are part of the Methodist doctrine. They really excited African Americans, slaves, in a way that some of the more established denominations hadn't done, and they reached out for slaves as well. And so, as a slave, Richard Allen became a preacher, preaching Methodism, and he was able to excite his master to the point where his master allowed him to buy his freedom. And so for something like $2,000, Allen was able to buy his freedom.
Where was he a slave?
In Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania. Right. He's a slave here. Philadelphia doesn't really abolish slavery until about 1780, which, of course, Pennsylvania is one of the first to abolish slavery. And it's a gradual abolition. But which really puts Pennsylvania ahead of the curve, really. But he buys his freedom, and then he joins the St. George's Methodist Church down in Philadelphia, the one that he eventually walked out of. And he really brought in a lot of black membership into the church. Part of the reason why they began to be segregated is because of the larger black population that he brings in.
Where was St. George Church?
St. George is I'm not really sure. It's still there.
It is still there?
It is still there. It's still an active congregation. I think it's right on First Street. It's right there, if you're familiar with Philadelphia, it's right there where Benjamin Franklin Bridge sort of begins. Mm-hmm. You know, it's right along, I'm saying First Street, I guess it's really Front Street, you know, right in that area, front end, and maybe, I want to say, Callow Hill or something like that, you know, not right in the center city area. Though.
Were integrated churches unusual in Philadelphia at the time?
Well, yeah, well, it all depends on what you mean by integrated, okay. There were, lots of churches were, especially the Methodists and the Baptists, they were more embracing of African Americans. Not a lot of them they were integrated in a sense that, you know, they had black members and white members, but then many of the services were segregated, or the black congregation had to sit in what I call those A.M.E corners. So really, you know, integrated in a sense, but still segregated within.
Was Richard Allen a minister at the St. George Church?
He was a preacher. He wasn't really an ordained minister. He didn't get ordained until later.
Did he ever conduct or preach for a integrated audience or for a white audience?
Oh, yeah, right. He brought in lots of white members, too. I mean, people came from all around. He was a wonderful speaker, you know, a wonderful preacher, and people came from all around to hear him preach. He not only preached at St. George's, but he would leave St. George and would preach at other churches during the Sunday. I mean, he preached 3-4 times on any given Sunday at not only St. George's, but at other different churches as well. Mostly, too, a mixed congregation, integrated congregations. Right, so really popular preacher, you know, really focused in on social issues, because once they leave St. George's, the first thing they leave St. George in like 1789, but Mother Bethel doesn't start until like 1794. But in 1789 they create what they call, right before they leave, they're about a couple of months before, they organized what's called the Free African Society, which is really, which provides social services to the black community. And so he's really active in providing services to the African American community here in Philadelphia that, you know, that black people weren't getting anyplace else. Yeah, so.
Who made up the congregation? I want to ask you something in here about, let's see, where is it? Oh, yeah, you say here, as members of a black religious bourgeoisie, A.M.E leaders had a vested interest in the American ideals, institutions, and cultures they had helped to produce. What do you mean by a black religious bourgeoisie?
Okay, well, they're basically, especially, I'm talking about in my era, okay? But even
that is the turn of the 20th century?
This is 100 years later than what I'm talking about now. And they've really become middle class, especially the bishops. I mean, the bishops, the hierarchy within the A.M.E church is pretty much middle class. We would even call them elite within that. They were definitely elite within the African American community. And so they ascribe to many of the same, well, they ascribe to all of the same values that middle class America ascribes to. And so they don't see the solutions to their problems anywhere but in the United States. And so they say that this is our home. We realize that racism exists here, but we're going to solve our problems here. Now, they disagree on how to solve those problems, but so they have an interest in American society. They believe in ideals like liberty and freedom and democracy, and so they're going to work out their problems here. So that's kind of what I mean, middle class. You know, I'm not really talking about the book doesn't really talk about what the masses say. Part of the reason is because the masses don't leave as much of a record behind, a written record, as the elites do. And so I'm really focusing in on what the elites say, within the black community. And so they are a religious bourgeoisie.
How big was the congregation in the beginning?
Of the A.M.E. Church?
Yeah.
Of the Mother Bethel.
Mother Bethel.
Oh, yeah, Mother Bethel.
Right, which predates the A.M.E. body.
Right, exactly. Mother Bethel, I think, starts off with something like 20, 30 members. But I know it goes up to over 100, right around 150 after the first 2 years. So, I mean, it grows rapidly. They have lots of problems with St. George's, because St. George's wants those members back, right? And so they don't really get fully independent from St. George's until really a court has to rule. And I think right around 1815, a court rules that indeed this is an independent church. They have the right to decide who their preachers are. They have a right to control their own affairs, and that St. George has no rights. And so once that happens, then a year later, that's when he calls all the ministers, and says, look what happened to us. We can do this all over the place, and so they create the denomination.
Can you talk about how that worked, how it was created, who came, how it was organized?
Like I say, it's 1816, and Richard Allen has put out a call to members, A.M.E. What happened in Philadelphia is being duplicated in other places, up and down the Eastern Seaboard. Once again, the revolutionary spirit, the Great Awakening, all of that is promoting ideas of freedom and equality and independence and all those kinds of things. And so and one of the things that happens that in American society, I like to say that, when I teach my American history, I teach that American apartheid is a northern invention, that you don't really need apartheid until you have large numbers of free African Americans. And you don't get large numbers, ironically, you don't get large numbers of free African Americans until the American Revolution, until 1790, because some slave owners are taking it to heart, and so they're setting their slaves free. The northern states, states by now, are slowly, passing gradual abolition, and so you're starting to see, larger numbers of free African Americans. And so with the larger numbers of free African Americans, we begin to see this notion of what we call the Negro problem. Okay, and the Negro problem is simply that there are black people in the United States, and so the Negro problem leads to the Negro question, right? What do we do with them? So one of the solutions is that we create apartheid and we segregate them, right? And so segregation is pushing part of this as well. But also, on the other hand, there's this notion of being independent that's also pushing part of this. So it's coming from two angles. And so he sends a call out to Methodist ministers up and down the coast, and they come to Philadelphia and they meet. Actually, Allen's not the first elected bishop. He's the first bishop, but they actually elect a Daniel Coker from Baltimore, and he refuses to take it. He says, "Hey, look, this is Allen's. This is mine. This is Allen's, right?" And so he steps down, and Allen becomes the first bishop, right? And eventually, Coker actually goes over to Sierra Leone and starts a colony over there, or he doesn't start the colony, but he adds to the colony that's over there, and so you get these black ministers coming here. They decide that they decide to adopt African as part of their name to not only their heritage but basically their heritage, and then they decide the discipline is going to remain Methodist, and then they're also going to be hierarchical, and so it's going to be Episcopal, so it's going to be run by bishops. And so they make all those decisions. They divide the nation up until, I think, right then it was maybe 3 conferences. During my time, and that's just different regions.
What do you mean by hierarchical? I mean, the bishops would oversee
Right. You're
more
going to
than
have
one church?
Yeah, that's one of the things that really made this work, my work, so fascinating for me, because not only was I getting individual responses of individual members, but I got this collective response that in many ways comes about because of the hierarchy. The A.M.E. structure, you have the bishops who run the day-to-day operation. Under that, you have the presiding elders. Under the presiding elders, you have pastors and traveling ministers. But then you also have this conference system that each region has an annual conference, and every 4 years they have a general conference, and the general conference has power above the bishops, right? And so, and also the general conference chooses the bishop. I might add that this year, general conference every 4 years, so they had one this year. They always are the same year, the presidential election, so it really works out to remember them. But they elected the first bishop to the first woman bishop, I should say, first woman bishop to the A.M.E. Church. So that's a real great accomplishment for the church itself. But hierarchical, and each position is elected. Even though they're ministers, you have to run for an election. And so every position except for the presiding elders. And so it was not only, so it was very political as well. And so, and they would come together and they would, at these conferences, and they would make collective decisions. And so that's what kind of fascinated me, because it wasn't just this person saying this. Now it's this, we're saying this as the Pennsylvania or the Philadelphia Conference of the A.M.E. Church is saying this, which is a collective response. So they had to vote and debate these things.
How big is the A.M.E. Church today?
You know, I really don't know. You know,
is it nationwide?
Oh yeah, it's international. It's international at the turn of the century. As a matter of fact, the woman who got elected bishop is going to they have a conference in Africa. Well, they have two conferences, one in West Africa and one in South Africa. I think she's going to the one in South Africa. So there are places in Haiti. There are congregations, in many of the black islands in the Caribbean, and so Canada, of course, has congregations, and so it's an international church. At the turn of during my time at the turn of the century, there's about 750,000 who belong to the A.M.E. Church. So I imagine they've expanded lots of stuff.
Founded in Philadelphia, where is it headquartered now?
The First Episcopal. Well, it's.
Is there a worldwide headquarters for it?
Well, it's a good question. The financial offices are in Washington. The first district, Episcopal district, which is the Philadelphia district, which is probably conference, I should say, which is probably the most powerful. Is still here it's here in Philadelphia, but the intellectual center, of course, is Wilberforce, and their publishing center is in Nashville. So it's there isn't. I would say national office. I would say Washington, where the money is, right?
And would you describe Wilberforce again briefly?
Wilberforce is right before the Civil War. The Methodist. The regular Methodist Church had opened up a college for black students at Wilberforce, and eventually the A.M.E. Church, I'm not sure if it's before or after the Civil War, but right around that time, 1850s, 1860s, they buy it from the Methodist Church, right? And so it becomes really a liberal arts college. It's really a liberal arts college, but it's also where they send their preachers or where they send their ministers. So, so that by the time 1900 comes around, they have ministers who are really trained in the arts and who are well versed in the classics. They can speak Latin, they can speak Greek. And so they're really the elite, even the intellectual elite of the community. You're going to see they have a ROTC program, and so the first black graduate, well, maybe not the first, but black graduates from West Point used to end up teaching there, at the ROTC program. Lots of scholars have taught there. It's really one of the leading, especially during that period, it's one of the leading institutions. It's still fairly small, though, in size compared to some other black colleges, but it's completely owned and run by the A.M.E. Church.
And there are archives there?
Right, the archives are there, right. And you'll find archives, for instance, in Mother Bethel. They have records down down there. The Pennsylvania Historical Society has some A.M.E. records. So you'll find A.M.E. records scattered in other places all around the country, but most of the records are right there at Wilberforce. Part of the reason why is because it's the university, but one of the more powerful ministers who appears in my book by the name of Arnett, he lived there, and he was a bit of a bibliophile. And so he kept, he got copies of, books, all sorts of, and he kept copies of records. He was the A.M.E. secretary for a good little while. And so he kept all the records, and so he got the records and he bound them. He got each of those annual conferences published their minutes. That's what I used for the book. And so he collected those minutes and he put them in, he bound them and put them away. And then 50 years later, there they were. Oh, yeah, look at this.
Now, in fairness to you, we haven't talked about the subject of your book yet, and I want to get to that. But first, a little bit about you. Where are you from originally? I'm
from Baltimore. I'm from, right down 90 miles away. I'm from, or what I like to call Philadelphia South. I call Philadelphia Baltimore North. So, but I'm from Baltimore, so I'm a Southerner, right?
You said you went to college late?
Yeah, I was a purchasing agent for an insurance company after I went to Air Force in '69 and served 4 years, and I got out of the Air Force and I started in the stock room of this insurance company, and I worked for them for 13 years, and they bought this insurance company down in Atlanta, and they moved my position down to Atlanta, right? And they said to me, they came to me and they said, Larry, they said, we'd like for you to go down to Atlanta, but you can't get any more promotions. You can still get raises, but you can't get any more promotions because you don't have a college education. And not only do you don't have a college education, but we don't really know how you got to be a purchasing agent in the first place because the job I had called for a college education, right? And it's just that when somebody left, I took their place. Somebody left, I took their place. Somebody left, I took their place, right? And so I ended up being a purchasing agent, right, from the stock room. And but then when they were talking to me, I really didn't want to go to Atlanta.
You were in Baltimore still?
I was in Baltimore, right? I didn't want to go to Atlanta in this dead-end position, what appeared to be a dead-end position. And I said, well, if college education is so important, maybe I should get me one of those college educations. So I started college in '84. Where? Right, at Coppin State College. It's a small black institution down in Baltimore, liberal arts school. I only went there to get certified in secondary education, and which I did. But once I got out of there, I got offered a fellowship to go to Ohio State. And once I got there, I was only supposed to be in a master's program for 1 year.
Studying what?
History, American history straight through, And once I got into the master's, well, when I got there, they told me, we've done away with the master's program. It was an accelerated 1 year program, right? They said, we've done away with that program. They said, but we'll let you be the last person to go through on it, right? But what we rather you do is go ahead and sign up for the PhD program, right? And I said, well, do you have money? They said, yeah, we got money. And I said, okay, I'll sign up. So I signed up for the program, and then spent 4 years there, and then Villanova, when I graduated with a PhD, Villanova offered me the position, and so I never did get to teach the high school. You know, even though now I go into high schools and as much as possible, and I work a lot with high school teachers as much as possible because I am trained and certified in secondary ed, so I understand how, I guess how high school teachers think, so like that.
How old were you when you finished college?
I finished when I finished Coppin.
Yeah.
I finished Coppin in '89, so I was 39.
And then
I finished
how many years
Ohio State in '43. Not in '43. I was 43 when I finished Ohio State, so I finished that in '93. So, and I'm an academic baby, really.
So you teach at Villanova history.
Right.
What courses are you teaching?
I teach African American history, first half and second half. I teach up to 1877 and from 1865. So it's during slavery and since slavery. I teach a course on civil rights. I teach a course on racism in the Americas. I teach a course on, I'm doing a course with English professor Crystal Lucky. We're looking at African American images in film and literature. We're going to look at a movie and read a book and talk about those, whatever comes up. So I usually teach, I also teach a modern world history course as well that's required for all of our freshmen. So I essentially teach Black history to white students. Having a ball doing it. I mean, it's just absolutely wonderful. It's because I lived in the inner city all my life. For 39 years. Until I left to go to Ohio State. Right. I lived in the inner city. Right. And so that's the life that I knew, that I understood. And so I guess I got to Villanova in a non-traditional way of getting to Villanova. And so I see the world perhaps a little different than what the students are used to seeing the world, which is good because that way I can get to teach them. But they also see the world a lot different from the way I see the world, so they get to teach me. So it works out perfect. I teach them, they teach me, and so everybody gets happy.
Is teaching at a college level what you expected it to be?
Yes, I think it is. Actually, it's more fulfilling and more rewarding than I expected it to be. Like I said, I was geared up to teach at the secondary level, and then I guess I backdoored my way into at the college level. But yes, it's definitely it's definitely fulfilling, and it's really rewarding, and it's challenging. I mean, teaching Black history to white students, I often have to confront my own racial attitudes, and so very often, my own attitudes are challenged, and sometimes I don't like what comes up, and so I've seen myself grow. For instance, students always tell me, they say, well, racism is generational, right? They say it's generational. They say, our parents are not as, we're not as racist as our parents aren't as racist as our grandparents, right? And so I say to them, okay, so what would your parents do if you brought, somebody Black home and said, Dad, Mom, this is my boyfriend or this is my girlfriend, and then I asked the Black students, what would you do? What do parents do if if you brought somebody white home? And so we discuss it, and they usually would say that, oh well, my parents, they might be a little upset, and they, but they would eventually, they pull me to the side, and they would, tell me all the things that might go wrong, but then they would eventually come around and accept it, right? Our grandparents, however, would kill us, take us out and shoot us, take us out of the will, absolutely never don't say anything else to us, and so I go around the room and we talk, ask a couple of different students that, and then after I've gone around the room, they turn around and they look at me and they say, well, Professor Little, what would you do if your daughter brought somebody white home and said, hey, Dad, this is my boyfriend, right? So for the first 3 or 4 years, I would look at him and say, well, it's generational, and I'm from the same generation that your parents are from, right? But in the last two to 3 years, I can say that my answer has honestly changed. That now, as long as they don't ask me to co-sign for anything, it's okay.
That's the bigger problem.
Right. It doesn't mean anything. And that comes from me being with these Villanova students and realizing that even though we were brought up miles apart, we really aren't that much different.
Your students feel comfortable discussing these issues, or do they have to warm up to it over the course of the semester?
I try to make them comfortable because I try to be honest. I ask them questions. They always tell me, Professor Will, that question is not fair. I say, yeah, I know it's not fair. That's why I asked it. So I'm always asking them unfair questions. But I usually. One of the things I learned, I don't know if I should say this on camera because this is one of my tricks, right?
Don't want to give it away.
But I learned that on a Roman Catholic campus, Villanova's Roman Catholic, right? A little confession goes a long way. And so one of the things that happened to me in my own personal experiences when I was I used to go around telling people that I was a feminist, right? I tell people, I say, I'm a feminist, right? I'm a feminist because I fight sexism everywhere, no matter what. Now, there might be some issues of sexuality that I don't understand, but other than that, I'm a feminist, right? And so, but then Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas hit, right? And not so much Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas, but in the aftermath of Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas, women were coming on television and explaining what sexism was. And they were saying, sexism is this. And I said, I do this. Sexism is that, I do that too. I said, I'm running around telling people that I'm a feminist, and I still have sexist attitudes. I didn't have sexist beliefs because I believed that women could do anything that men could do, but I still had attitudes, and of course attitudes accounted for behavior. And so once those women informed me that I had sexist attitudes, then I had to change those attitudes and I had to change those behaviors. So one of the things that I do to try to relax the students, I tell them that story and let them say, hey, look, and I know one would say that I'm a feminist. I say I'm a sexist, and I fight it every single day to try to stop from being that way, because it's an attitude, and it's an attitude I don't like. And so I have to try to control that. I have to try to eliminate that. And so, I don't claim to be I'm not sexist, but I know that it's there, and it can come to the surface. And so I try to stop that from coming to the surface. And so when they start to understand, and they begin to realize that, I try to be totally honest with them, and they know that I will never slam them. Their classmates might slam them, right? But I will never slam them, right? And so they become really more comfortable. And I think I bring a sincerity to the classroom too that they pick up on real quick too, because I'm sincere about the issue. I tell people that I'm at Villanova to help to fight racism. I tell everybody as soon as they walk into the class, I tell them I got an agenda. Tell you this is history according to me. Okay, now so that means that you have to take what I say and you have to take what you read, everything with a grain of salt. You have to be critical of what I say. You have to be critical of what you read. You have to make your own types of decisions, based on your own values. And so, so I let them know right away that I teach my history geared toward trying to expose and eliminate racism. And so,
how's it going?
It's going great. It really is. I'm having a ball.
Do you feel like you're making progress in that? Do you feel is the nation making progress in that?
Well, tough question. I have an optimism that I know that maybe some of my colleagues might not have. Part of my optimism I really comes from working with the students. I can see, I know I don't reach every student, and even though I try to reach every student, but I can see changes. I can see them starting to question, some of their own, some of the things that they took for granted, and for me, I think, especially for our students, because I realize that the Villanova students will be the movers and the shakers sooner or later, right? And so if I can just plant a seed that says to them that, that some of the way that African Americans and other people have been treated in this country hasn't always been the way that history has portrayed it, then I think it has made a difference. Now, as the nation as a whole, I still think we have a lot of problems in the nation, but I think that one of the things that we need to do is we really need to be honest with each other. Sometimes we're not really honest with each other, and it's difficult because race is a difficult question. It's very controversial. It's challenging, and people don't want to confront it very often. One of the things that I say to my students is, I look at it and I say, let me try to understand something. I say, we've been here since 1619. I say, you've been here since 1619? Well, 1607. I'll give you a few years. You've been here since 1607. I've been here since 1619. How come I have light-skinned people in my family and you don't have any dark-skinned people in your family, right? Explain that to me. Why is that like that, And that opens up a dialogue that we really begin to try to look at. Why is it? Why does that exist, And it creates a dialogue that really gets the students to wondering about issues of race and racism. I really don't think race is the problem. It's racism is the problem, really. And so. Whether if it's getting better, I think it is getting better, but I think it's an awful long way to go, And I personally am optimistic. I refuse to be pessimistic. I couldn't teach at Villanova if I were pessimistic. I'm really optimistic, and I think I am making some differences, here and there. I'm giving the keynote address for our fall convocation. So I get to talk to everybody at one time, and I know that's something, different for Villanova to have a black professor speaking before the whole university. Something different, something new. So
we should probably talk about your book before we run out of time.
Book's nice.
The title is Disciples of Liberty, African Methodist Episcopal Church in the Age of Imperialism. What's the age of imperialism?
Well, I look at the age of imperialism in this book. I really define the age of imperialism from about 1884 to 1916. And the age of imperialism is characterized by this burst of activity by industrial nations, England, France, United States, Germany, Italy, Japan. These industrial nations are going around conquering less advanced nations all across the globe. Part of the reason, of course, is economics. Part of it is to control the resources of the land. But during this period, it almost becomes a goal to itself. Why are you conquering that land? Why are you conquering this deserted island? There's only 50 people live on the island. Why do you conquer that? Because to make that part of my empire. The more I have, the better my empire is. And so we see this burst of activity right before World War I. As a matter of fact, there are some scholars who think it's this burst of activity that really helped to lead to World War I because they come in competition with each other. England claims this island. Germany claims this island. Both of them send a gunship to this island. They come into this confrontation. And so I look at that phenomena that's going on during that time, which is really a part of a larger imperialism.
What was the United States' involvement in imperialism at the time?
Well, the United States really gets involved with the Spanish-American War. The United States is late in the game, and they get involved with the Spanish-American War. Once at the end of the Spanish-American War, the United States ends up with new territories. They end up with territories in Cuba, in Puerto Rico. They end up with the Philippines. They end up with Guam. And so you begin to see the United States building an empire, right? And of course, that goes against the Constitution of the United States because you're controlling other people without their permission. And of course, that's a violation of American principle. And so you have Americans who are violating their own principles of democracy and liberty and equality. And so how do you reconcile that? And so and especially for African Americans who believe in liberty and equality and think that these people of these foreign lands should have those same liberty and equality, it really creates this problem for them, because they know that this American liberty and this American equality is going to be accompanied by American racism. And so it becomes a real problem for them to reconcile. And so that's what part of what I look at here is how they try to reconcile that.
So what is the A.M.E. Church's involvement?
Well, mostly as observers, but more than observers, they're actually trying to, especially in nations, what they consider black nations, places like Haiti, places like Puerto Rico, places like Cuba, and nations of color like the Philippines within the American empire, is they're really trying to influence American policy, and they're trying to, they believe in American democracy, and they want American democracy to come to those places, but they don't want American democracy to come to those places accompanying racism. With racism. And so they continually try to remind American society of American principles. And so you're going to see them taking an active role in missionary efforts in these lands that are being conquered. But it's a hard sell, because if I'm black and I'm telling I'm telling somebody of color of a different land that you need to embrace American democracy and American liberty, and that person looks at me and says, well, in American society, don't they lynch you? And so it becomes a difficult sell. And so part of what they're trying to do is they're trying to be protectors of these people of foreign lands that are coming into the American empire. And at the same time, they're trying to be sort of like a moral barometer or something for the nation itself, to say, hey, you can't conquer a people and bring this racism in there, because you've got enough problems here, right here.
How did they go about communicating that message?
They have a communication network that they set up. They have those annual conferences. They have a weekly newspaper, several weekly newspapers, but one main newspaper coming out of Philadelphia, the Christian Recorder, oldest black newspaper, continuously running.
It's still published?
Still published. And then they have the A.M.E. Church Review, which was a quarterly magazine. But they would send, at those conferences that I'm talking about, right, they would send, the conference would, vote on a resolution, and they would send a resolution to Congress, or they would send the resolution to the president, and I've got some examples of replies to those resolutions, So they would, send resolutions and memorials to and petitions to Congress, stating their point of view and their goal. And so it's really trying to use propaganda to influence, how dare you condemn France in the Dreyfus affair? France is wrong, but you have no right to condemn France, because look what you're doing. So, we can condemn France, but you have no right to condemn France, right? So, they're using that communication network that they create to help to get that message out. And like I said, they send petitions and memorials and resolutions to Congress all the time.
Is there any evidence that they were effective?
That's the tough question. That's the tough question. It's really difficult to answer that, because United States continues to be an imperial power all the way up until there are some who would suggest that the United States continues to be an imperial power. The thing that the way I like to answer that is that without their voices, without a voice of dissent in this country, then it may have there's no telling what the nation may have done. But by them being a part of a chorus, because it's not just them who are making these, who are having these positions. There are white Americans also who have these same positions, and so they are part of a chorus that comes together to condemn American actions. And so how effective they are, it's really difficult to say. But I like to think that in many ways they still were the conscience of the nation. In some ways they stopped American society from going perhaps too far.
How many black voters were there at the turn of the century?
That's a regional kind of an issue because in the South they're really being disenfranchised after 1880. The numbers of black voters in the South goes down real fast, so that by 1900 it's really not even a factor. In 1900 though, in the northern states, there is a talk among African American leaders that black voters held the swing vote in several key northern industrial states, places like Ohio, places like Pennsylvania, where African Americans still going to vote. Michigan, Illinois, all key industrial states. You're going to see New York. You're going to see a good number of African American voters, and in some key elections they do have a pivotal vote. And so you're going to see that not so much in the South, but in the North, they're going to be courted by both Democratic and Republican Party. Of course, most African Americans belong to the Republican Party then, because it's the party of Lincoln, right? And the Democratic Party are disfranchising them in the South, but in the North is a different, especially in urban areas, places like New York City and Philadelphia, where that Democratic machine is starting to be built. That Democratic machine reaches out to African Americans and, in many instances provides some services. And so, the vote is pretty solidly Republican, but you can see pockets of African Americans who there are black Democrats in the North. So, in some instances they, I won't say that they are the swing vote, but they do make a block, so they do make a difference in some elections.
Did black voters in the North see a conflict between their support for the Republican Party and, at the time, it was President McKinley during the Spanish-American War and Theodore Roosevelt immediately after that, and the expansionist policies that they had?
That's what the book is about. That's because they understand that that's their problem. The party that's doing this is also the party that they rely on, and so I mean, and for instance, one guy says, we got a choice. It's a choice of dilemmas. Do we go for the racist party that subjugates black people in America, or do we go for the racist party that subjugates people of color, around the world? And so it becomes a dilemma there.
When you say in the book that there was some talk of starting an African American or a black American party.
Oh yeah, there's talk about of creating this all-black party. Some talk, a couple of organizations like the Afro-American League, which later becomes the Afro-American Council, sort of becomes, but they are part of their goal is to work toward, or part of the founders' goal was to work toward creating a political party, or at the very least, for all African Americans to gather in a convention and decide who is going to get the black vote. Of course, that's kind of wishful thinking, because African Americans have a range of opinions, just like, so to say that who's going to get the black vote is really kind of, I don't know, that's standing on shaky ground in the first place, right?
We only have a couple minutes left, and I want to read off a couple of names who appear prominently in this book, and just get you to give a little kind of a thumbnail biography of them, if you would. Richard Wright.
Richard Wright is he becomes a bishop later in the book. Well, he doesn't become a bishop in the book, but he becomes later in his career. He is he becomes the A.M.E. historiographer, and he's really a very political person.
What's a historiographer as opposed to a historian?
Historian.
Oh, it's just a longer word.
It's just a longer word, right? I couldn't quite figure that one out either. But that's what they call their historian. I would say a historiographer is somebody who studies what different historians write, but that's not how they would define it. He's the historian, right? Pretty, once again, very political guy. Very political guy. He's not one of the ones I know too much about. Give me another one.
And he's around 1900?
He's right around 1900.
Henry Turner?
Henry McNeill Turner. He is perhaps one of the most charismatic members of the church during this time. He leads the Back to Africa movement. He's a black nationalist. He says that anybody who would go to fight in the Philippines, any black person who goes to fight in the Philippines is a fool or a scullion, and he hopes that they're fools, right? He opposes McKinley. He's out for the Democrats. Very much a black nationalist. He wants to go over to Africa and create a black Christian nation that can be a shining example of the capacity, the capability of African Americans to govern themselves. So he's probably the most radical figure within the A.M.E. Church.
Benjamin Tanner,
Philadelphian. Theological, very theological. He spends lots of time trying to show the black figures within the Bible. Once again, very political. There's a new book out by him, about him by Seville over in, turn the book over. Yeah, this very first one, let's see, what is it? Fire in His Heart, William Surreal. Has a new biography out about him. Once again, God is black. I mean, not God is black, but many of the, he believes that Ham is black, therefore...
the son of Noah.
Son of Noah, Ham is black, therefore, if Ham is black, then Canaan is black, and Mizraim and Put, who are sons of Ham, are all black. And so you create this whole black biblical genealogy. And he does that. He looks at that, and he tries to place Africans within biblical history and within biblical genealogy.
And he was the father of Henry O. Tanner, the artist.
Right, the artist. He's father of Henry O. Tanner, the artist. And he's also founder of the A.M.E. Church Review as well. And he was longtime editor of the Christian Recorder, of the newspaper. He really put the newspaper on good standing. There's
a couple more names I want to ask you about, but we are running out of time. We only have about a minute left, and we started off talking about the Philippine-American War. Can you give us about a 45-second description of who fought who in the Philippine-American War?
Okay, the United States, when the Spanish-American War breaks out, already the Filipinos have an insurgent action against Spain. And once the United States declares war, the Filipinos think that the United States is going to become their allies. Well, what happens is that the United States buys the Philippines. He eventually ends up buying the Philippines. The Filipinos have declared independence. Now, they don't have anything to do with this independence declared by the Philippine insurgents. And so even though they were really kind of allies during the Spanish-American War, once the United States takes over the Philippines, an insurgent action begins against the United States by the same people who were fighting Spain. It lasts for about 3 years, and the war is really a whole lot like Vietnam. It's our first Vietnam. Part of the reason why it's not a very popular war. It's not a splendid little war.
You working on another book?
Right now I'm looking at political cartoons in black newspapers during the Civil Rights era. So that way I don't have to write a whole lot. I can just say, look at Figure 4.
This is the book we've been talking about, Disciples of Liberty, the African Methodist Episcopal Church in the Age of Imperialism. Lawrence Little, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
You've been listening to a podcast of PA Books, a production of PCN, the Pennsylvania Cable Network. Full episodes of PA Books, as well as other PCN programs, are available to stream with the PCN app. Visit PCNTV.com or the App Store for details. Like us on Facebook.